But here's what they did. The Germans began capturing, starting in 1914, right, with the Battle of Tannenberg and similar places. They began capturing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Russian prisoners of war. So then they began selecting them out. And they'd say, okay, we're going to select out of this pool of the Russian prisoners of war, we're going to select the ones who come from places that we're going to call Ukraine, right? Because these intellectuals we have, these studies that we've got, show us that this is where the Ukrainian peasant dialect is spoken, right, among the farmers. So they get them. Then they get the officers out and the non-coms out, the sergeants and so forth, and they're left with about 50,000 people in a special prisoner of war camp. So the Germans then go to them and say, do you want to be exempted from work? Yes. Do you want to get special good treatment? Yes. The price of that is you're going to take classes. So they put them in luxurious, comparatively, prisoner of war camps back in Germany, right? Places, that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And they start giving them classes on the idea of Ukraine, what it means to be a Ukrainian. That you've been a Ukrainian all along, you didn't know it. But the problem is that these prisoners of war are not interested. They don't care. Ukraine means nothing to them. So then the Germans change tactics, and they say, guess what? We're going to teach you agronomy, and we're going to teach you, how to be a good farmer. And this is extremely interesting to the POWs because they say, we're getting the idea that there's going to be a political upheaval in Russia, and there's going to be a land reform, and the estates are going to be broken up, and we are going to get pieces of that. So this they like. And the Germans, as the war goes on, right, and their difficulties grow, they begin promoting revolution, communism. Right? Communism, in many ways, is something pushed by Field Marshal von Hindenburg and General von Ludendorff, the two military bosses of Germany, practically the dictators of Germany for much of this time. These are the guys who, remember, they shipped Lenin in the sealed train from Switzerland to Finland, right? Because they wanted to infect the Tsarist Empire with the bacillus of communism. They thought that this would lead to chaos, right? They didn't expect this to lead to the Soviet state. That was beyond their ability to predict. So they teach them Ukrainian idea as much as they can, how to be a good agronomist and farmer, animal husbandry and all this stuff, and the need for revolution. So this group, the people that actually pass the course, are about 10,000. But by the time they get out, they're 10,000 revolutionary cadre. So they go back to Ukraine. Now, in the spring of 1917, we have the February Revolution in St. Petersburg. The Tsar is overthrown. He has to abdicate. Kerensky comes in. And at this point, there are enough of these prisoner of war types, plus professors, plus poets, right, plus dreamers, who decide we're going to have an autonomous Ukraine, and they create what is known as the Ukrainian Rada, right? Rada just means Soviet, right? Same idea, council. So the Ukrainian Rada comes about in Kiev, and at the beginning, it's promoted by the Germans, right, who by now are holding parts of this territory on the Eastern Front. As the Tsarist armies have retreated, the Germans have advanced, and they decide that not only will they have the Rada, but eventually they start thinking about full independence, right, definitively breaking with the Russian Empire. And this is more or less where we get by the end of 1917, right, after the November Revolution in St. Petersburg. We have the Bolsheviks, the communists with Lenin and Trotsky. They take over. And at that point, between December and January, Ukraine says, okay, we've had it. We're the independent country of Ukraine. And that's a nice idea. But, of course, this Rada has no support. They have no state apparatus. They have no troops to speak of. So what's going to happen? Well, there's a general armistice all along the Eastern Front in December 1917. And this negotiation process starts in this town of Brest-Litovsk. So what happens, though, is between January and February, the German General Staff makes a deal with the Ukrainian Rada, and it goes like this. The German army will support the independence of Ukraine, and of course without this they couldn't have lasted for a minute, because the Bolsheviks were, constantly outside of Kiev, shooting artillery into Kiev. They would have been overthrown within days or weeks at the most. But the German army says, we'll protect you, we'll make sure you stay in power, but here's what we want. And this is now the big issue, is food. Food. There were hunger riots in Vienna in the summer of 1917 because, of course, the British, and by now American-British, sea blockade does not let any food come into Germany, right? People are starving in Berlin, in Vienna, all over the place. They're not getting anything to eat. So the Germans say, look, the price of independence for you is this: 1 million tons of grain. During the year 1918, we want you to deliver 1 million tons of grain. Then we want 400 million eggs. It's amazing. They go through this accounting. We want 50,000 tons of beef, or maybe it's pounds, but a lot of beef. And we want flax, we want tungsten, and on and on. Eventually they want coal, and they want all sorts of things that Ukraine produced, because Ukraine has this tremendously fertile black earth region. This is one of the things that the Europeans today want to buy up, right? They want to grab it at bargain basement prices. And there are coal mines and indeed steel mills, because there was already something there, although nothing like what the Soviets put up. So that's how Ukraine gets on the map. And this is called the bread piece of Brest-Litovsk, early February 1918. So the Germans are sponsoring Ukraine. And, you could say Ukraine is made in Germany. It's a creature of Hindenburg and Ludendorff, these, reactionary monsters. It's the delicatessen of the German General Staff, right? It's a supermarket, what have you. And in the middle of it, you've got this group called the Rada, and they are about as incompetent as this group that we see today, right? They're absolutely incapable of doing anything, right? They make ultimatums, they back down, they can't pay their bills, they're chaotic, right? It's exactly what we see right now. Fritz Fischer quotes a British diplomat from the British Foreign Office, and here's what he says in early 1918. He says, the present Ukrainian government is nothing else than a club of speculative political adventurers who are engaged in doing wonderful business with the support of German bayonets. So you could say that today, right? You look at these people, not just Turchinov and Yatsenyuk, but Tyanibok, you have the Svoboda Party. They're racist, they're anti-Semitic, they're neo-Nazi, they're reactionary. Then you have the right sector. Those guys are just, brown shirts of the Hitler type, not much difference, right? The late Muzichka, who has now gone to his reward, but, people for whom killing and threats and beatings and so forth, this is the daily routine, except that this time it's NATO bayonets, right, that they'd like to be based on, and the U.S.
Well, now, you mentioned the bread piece of 1918, right?
Right.
Is that what you're talking about right now, when they're supplying all this food to Germany?
Well, that was 1918, right? The Germans hope that they're going to get all this food. The irony is they don't get it because the Ukrainian peasants sabotage the operation. And the Rada is too incompetent to deliver the food. So the Germans expect 1 million tons of grain. The estimate I've seen is that the whole operation, which goes on for more than a year, the Germans get 40,000 truckloads of various kinds of food. But that is a very, very bad return. So what the Germans do is they say, we're going to kick out the Rada, and we're going to bring in a dictator, and the guy's name is Skoropadsky, And they say, now we're going to squeeze these Ukrainian peasants like a lemon. And ironically, the result of that is that the Ukrainian peasants begin to say, you know, the Russian Empire wasn't that bad. They're communists now, but they're still got to be better than this German puppet Skoropadsky. So in effect, the attempt to collect the food drives the Ukrainian peasants back into the arms by now of Moscow, right, of the Soviets, right, Lenin, Trotsky, and so forth. Now today, if you look at what's going to happen if the signs are fulfilled, right, the government in Kiev, the Kiev fascist clique, as I call them, they have agreed to the IMF conditionalities. That's also the demand of the European Union, and has been, since last autumn at the beginning of the crisis. They want the price of natural gas doubled. They want the social safety net to be savaged. No more help for pregnant women. No more help for nursing mothers. No more help for old people, sick people, children, right? You go through the list. It's the usual savagery of the IMF conditionalities, or memorandum, right, as it's known after Greece. So what you've got today is, even if the current crisis does not push the eastern Ukraine back into the arms of Russia, as soon as you get a new regime and they start imposing this deadly, murderous austerity ordered by the IMF and the European Union and the European Central Bank, the Troika, then that's going to do it, right? That's going to be the destruction of Ukraine. And people who want to secede from Ukraine are running, of course, they're running away from the neo-Nazis, anti-Semites, and hooligans who rule in Kiev. But they're also running from the idea that they don't want to go through the IMF shock therapy meat grinder. Some of them for the second time, right? Because some of them were part of it when it was Russia. So as a result of that, after some episodes in the Civil War, right? You got to remember these people like Denikin and Kornilov and Wrangel, right? The white armies that tried to put an end to the communist rule in Moscow, they were generally based on the Black Sea. And essentially, you look at this, in both world wars, the Germans occupied Odessa and Sevastopol in the Crimea in both world wars. And after World War I, the French came back and occupied Odessa and Sevastopol. And, of course, these are precisely the cities that the British and the French had occupied during the Crimean War of 1853 to 1856. So if you're a Russian, you'd have to say, well, first of all, Ukraine and the north coast of the Black Sea, right, what's called the Pontic Steppe, right, the land north of the Black Sea. They say that's an integral part of Russia. Not only is it an integral part of Russia, but it is one of the main avenues of attack that has been used by the British, the French, the Germans, and everybody else who wanted to attack Russia have tried it also using that area. So at that point, Ukraine is back in. They become the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic.